by the way, all intelligence suggests that a large rebel force are making their way through you towards the airport.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Old Paratrooper Podcast. But before we get started, I want to tell you about our new sponsors, Veterans for Veterans. If you served after 1987 and your hearing's taken a knock from your time in the forces, these are the people to speak to. They've helped thousands of veterans like us claim compensation for tinnitus and hearing loss. They're ex-military themselves, so they genuinely get it.
It's free to check if you qualify, and the claims are no win, no fee. To get started, click the link in this video or visit veteransforveterans.co.uk.
Today's guest, I am proud to announce, former paratrooper, former Pathfinder, and owner of a military cross, Steve Heaney. How you doing, Steve? How you doing, buddy?
Hello, Chris. Yeah, I'm good, mate. Really good.
No, thank you for taking the time to come on. I always appreciate it. I know people have busy lives. I say it all the time. So I'm just very, very kind of privileged that you've taken the time to come on and speak to me. It means a lot, buddy. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, mate. Anything to support the Reg.
Nice. What I like to do with all the podcasts, just like to start at the beginning, basically. It seems like the best place to start. Where you grew up, what you were like as a kid, and then get some sort of feelings for why you kind of joined the Reg. Over to you. Whereabouts you from and where did you grow up, pal?
So I was born, raised in Middlesbrough, northeast of England, sort of child of the late 60s. And yeah, I mean, so my sort of path towards the Reg, if you like, is kind of started. I mean, look, back in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, Middlesbrough was the heartland of the industrial UK. You know, there was only a very few places that kind of took the mass workforce, and that was British Steel or chemicals. So, you know, if you kind of sort of get a picture of what it was like up here, obviously we nicknamed the Smoggies for that sort of haze that kind of sat above the city, you know, but yeah, I mean, my sort of trajectory, if you like, towards the Reg started in, well, I would imagine most people who are old enough to remember, obviously, was the Falklands. I was 13 years old, you know, so midway through secondary education, you know, and this thing kind of unfolded on the TV, you know, and just watching it. I mean, you know, I was quite fortunate that one of my dad's closest mates, you know, who worked on the sites with my dad, his son was a full screw in 3-para, a lad called Mark Henderson. So I kind of known Mark, and obviously, you know, when Mark was back on leave, we'd have these discussions about what the Reg was like. And then I would flick over to TV and see the Reg performing down south. And it was just like everybody else that's ever had anything to do with the Reg. It's just a draw. It is this, you know, a pull towards it, you know, the ethos, that maroon beret, you know, and that's what happened to me, Chris. You know, 13 years old and thinking, right, that's me. People say light bulb moments, don't they? I mean, I firmly believe I had one. It might sound cliche, might sound a little bit old, but I really had a sort of moment when I thought, yeah, that's for me. And then I spent the next sort of 2.5 years literally doing everything I could, reading about the Reg, you know, signing up to the Elite magazine, following it on TV, carrying on my conversations with Oz, and then, you know, making that decision to head down into the town and try to sign up, you know, to be met by, you know, obviously my regiment at the time, local regiment then, was the Green Howards. You know, so getting through the door and trying to join any regiment but the Green Howards was an absolute, it was a chore in itself, you know, Chris.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. They do that, don't they? That's what they do in the Army Careers Office. They have whoever's on the counter. I've spoke about this at length. When you go into an Army Careers Office, I'm a big lad, Grenadier Guard. He was like that. Oh, you're going in the Guards. I was like, I'm not. There's not a chance in hell. I was, you know, at that time, I'd made my mind up. It's a difficult one. Some people know that they want to join the Reg. Obviously, a lot of people around that time, like you said, the Falklands was big. It was either Para Reg or Marines for a lot of people, or the Guards. People forget.
The Guards,
you know, for me, I was unsure. I didn't know a massive amount about the Reg at that point when I joined up. But yeah, so 80s, sort of joining 86, you kind of went in. Obviously, you're going to have it still fresh after the Falklands. What was kind of turning up? Because obviously you joined Junior Para Company first before you went. But what was that like, sort of joining Junior Para Company at that time? At 16 as well, you know, at 16 and a half.
Well, I mean, you know, there's, you know, the Junior Para has been likened to a lot of organisations in history. Most of them, you know, satanical, cruel, brutal. It was a regime, you know, it was everything that, you know, I kind of got on the train naively, as you do, you know, having listened to the Army Careers Office and all the rest. But I was quite fortunate in that I had a good grounding. So I kind of knew, because of my relationship with Oz, it was, like I said, it was a full screw and 3-para then. I kind of knew what I was going into in a way. But again, nothing can give you the realism or the experience of getting off the coach. I mean, Junior Para had moved to Purbright when I was 6 Platoon Junior Para. So I joined on the 7th of July, 1986 was when I arrived in Purbright. Junior Para had moved then from Depot Para in the shop to the Guards Depot in Surrey, in Purbright. So, and my about 70% of the instructors were 2 and 3 para, so they were Falklands vets. We had a couple of guys from 1 para, you know, so you're getting the stories as well. You know, you're getting the, you know, when you're crawling around Hankley Common, or when you're tabbing, or when you're feeling, you know, under extreme pressure, you've got a full screw stood over you going, listen to me, sunshine. You know, 4 years ago, I was doing this under fire. And that kind of, you know, that kind of done two things. One, you obviously got down a little bit deeper on your belt buckle. But secondly, it kind of motivated you to think, what we're doing now, these people have actually done it. And that itself is a great sort of, you know, motivator.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you probably got the best trainers on the planet at that time, fresh out of combat. You know, they've gone to, you know, they've done juniors, they've been and experienced it. So yeah, I can imagine it being an interesting time to be in Junior Para, to say the least. So obviously you've gone through Junior Para, and then you go on to Depot Para. What was the difference did you find? Because I didn't do Junior Para. I went straight to Depot in Lichfield in the late 90s, and then on to Cattery. So what was the big differences going from Junior Para over to kind of Depot Para?
I'll say this, and I'll say it with absolutely no sort of remorsing about this. Junior Para for me was far harder than the Depot.
Really? Oh, okay.
And I think for a couple of reasons. One, you know, left home at 16 on the train. I had an amazing childhood. You know, people often say, and this is what gets me about, you know, people talking about the British Army. We're all broken. We're all battered. We're all psychologically deprived of any kind of empathy. You know, guys come back from combat and we're all broken. We join the army because it's the choice between the army and prison. It's not. And it was never like that for me. And it's never been like that for the vast amount of people I came across in my career. You know, most from the working class. So a lot of Geordies, a lot of jocks, Manx, Cockneys, you know, populated the Reg, and especially 3-para at that time, you know. So going down to Junior Para and straight into that brutality, I mean, it wasn't any easier, you know, it was straight into 30-pound Bergens, you know, SLR, GPMG, 84, tabbing around, Pirbright, which is a really, really robust training area. Probably even more so than Aldershot was. Aldershot had 2 or 3 peaks and Long Valley. Pirbright had quite a lot more, so it was really difficult. The instructors were brutal, but necessarily so, I think. Like you said, having just 4 years previous to that, storming up Longdon or Goose Green, the realism and the importance of training was driving that. So it was hard in junior para. The issue that you have with junior para is that you spend 6 months, so you then go to depot para. Now, the idea with junior para is you join a platoon that's at a certain stage in training. And the platoon that we went to, so we started with about 55 in junior para, and I think about 27 of us got to depot. All of us went to week 4. So I went into 525 platoon. So we joined it in week 4. So you've got the 50 people that are already there, adult recruits, in week 4. And then all of these guys turn up. Bearing in mind at that stage, we had red berets with a green backing on the Power Edge cap badge. So we turn up, they're still running around in their crap hats. And you turn up and you're smart and you're fit and you're not flustered, and they hate you. The instructors hate you. It's not always rosy turning up from junior para. So, and there's an expectation then from the full screws in depot that you are supremely fit and you should be leading the way and you should be sort of dragging those recruits, the sort of adult recruits, let me call them, with you. So it's a real strange dynamic for them first couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. I mean, look, depot's tough. Whichever kind of era you want to come through, you'll always argue that people say it's tougher in their day. I still believe it's as tough now as it's probably always been, with a few exceptions. But yeah, it's designed that way, isn't it? It's designed to make paratroopers. Some people will frown on the way it's done, but it's done for a reason. That's why we are one of the, arguably, because I'll get some criticism, one of the best regiments, certainly in the British Army, and if not the world. So yeah, no, fair play, buddy. Moving on through depot, how did you find? I always ask this question. Usually, with guys that have gone through training, how did you find P Company? Because some people love it, some people hate it. It's like Marmite, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, mate, I mean, when I was in the depot, so I got to the depot just after the age of 17 a bit. I was 6'1", 12 stone, well, not even that, 11 stone soaking wet. I didn't have an ounce of muscle on me. Do you know what I mean? I was see-through. But I could tab. So, P Company then, so struggled, I'll talk you through it. So struggled with the steeplechase, about 6th from last on the steeplechase. Milling, okay, it is what it is. Trainasium, it is what it is. Doesn't require an ounce of skill. You've just got to do the jumps, do the leaps and do it. But where P Company picked up for me was when we went to Brecon. So, straight up over the Fan. And then obviously we were bashing at Cumgoody. And then the next day up the reverse route of the Fan. And then obviously Fan 4 and then the 10K speed march back. So I kind of came into my own a little bit then. Up until then, I was probably mid to the bottom of the pack, if I was to be perfectly honest, But once we went to Wales, I would probably say that if there is such a thing as 10 points every event, then I was okay. And then the stretcher again, it is what it is. Then that you are 1 hour 45 minutes away from the Maroon Machine, so it's up to you then. But P Company was hard. Of course, it's meant to be hard. you know, seen a lot of people, you know, a lot of people that you've spent them, whatever it was, 10, 11 weeks with prior to going on it, come off the log. You've seen people getting injured, and then you know, and then you're still there on the square at the end. So yeah, I mean, I was okay. I picked up P Company Champion Recruit, but I think that was probably from the Brecon phase onwards. You know, I probably, you know, I was scraping the pass to get there, but obviously Brecon was a little bit easier for me.
Yeah, it's always interesting to get people's views on it and what they found difficult and what they didn't find difficult. You know, it's all hard, but people have strengths and weaknesses, don't they? And like you say, your strength is when you got to Brecon, you kind of excelled. You know, I make no secret of the fact I found P Company horrendous through injuries. Now, I'm probably one of the only people around that's done P Company 3 times in 6 months.
Wow.
And I know I used to hold that as a bit of an embarrassment, but now I always say I'm immensely proud that I stuck at it and got through. That was my resilience through injuries. And, you know, I've had injuries my whole life, but it's not easy. And P Company Champion, you know, is quite an accolade, you know, for paratroopers. We know how the competition you've got on P Company as well. So, yeah, I'm immensely proud of that aspect. Obviously, you've done P Company, you go on, you do your jumps, you do the exercise after P Company and all that kind of stuff. Turning up at 3 para. So that was where you first went. Am I correct in saying that? Straight to 3 para?
Yeah, so when we left the depot, I think there was about 20 something of us made it through. I think there was about 24, 25. I think about 20 or 21 went to 2 para.
All right. Okay.
And the reason being that 2 para had just been sort of tipped that they were doing the 6-month Belize tour shortly after. I think that was probably the tail end of 87, maybe, that they were scheduled to go. So 4 of us went to 3 para. I went because I was claimed. So obviously, you know, Oz had gone there and I'd gone up there. So I think 4 of us went to 3, and then the rest went to 2 para.
Okay, doke. So no, did you go straight? Because I know a lot of people, like when I came through as well, I literally near enough flew off the square. I went straight to Aldershot and then straight onto Northern Ireland training. You were a bit the same. Did you go pretty much straight out to Northern Ireland, Belfast? Is that right?
No. So I got to Battalion probably in and around the beginning of May, about May 87.
Right.
So we had about 2.5 years. I mean, so the battalion deployed to Belfast on a 2-year tour in January of 89.
Right, okay.
So that was ours. So we went out. So I was there from the January of 89 till the December of 89, Christmas leave, because obviously prior to that I'd volunteered for PF selection. So I only did a year of the 2-year tour in Belfast. I left in the December of 89 for leave and then went on the PF selection in the January of 90.
That's early for a Tom to get to battalion and go on PF. Was you like driven by that? What was your kind of logic, or what was you thinking in PF? Was that when did you pick up that you wanted to go on that? Because PF wasn't something that was massively publicised, was it?
No,
back
it wasn't.
then?
No. So obviously we halfway through. Well, before we'd gone to Belfast, obviously. You know, 3 para in Montgomery lines. And then, like you said, you know, at the time, the PF had a very, very distinctive DZ flash. They kind of had the sort of, you know, the sort of red and blue with the white arrow. It was unmissable, you know, and I knew every other DZ flash. So whether it be the depot, 1, 2, 3 para, you know, whether it be the TA battalion's DZ flashes. And then you see this one with a Power Age cap badge, and I was like, what the hell's that? And then you ask. And I was quite fortunate that a couple of the full screws I had in junior para had then come back to the battalion as sergeants, and they'd both been the patrols platoon. So back in the day, the patrols platoons were Halo trained.
All right, okay.
Yeah, so the patrols platoons were Halo trained. And then in sort of, you know, in the when 16 Independent kind of broke up, they lost the parachuting role when it was the Guards Independent, so they lost the Pathfinder role. And then, if you like, the reconnaissance fell to the Battalion Patrols platoons.
Right.
And then as we moved towards 1985, 5 Brigade realised that the skill sets required of an advanced force needed to be isolated so that you weren't wrapped up in other battalion training and duties. It needed to be a very specific and repetitive set of skills. So that's when in 85, that's when they re-established the Pathfinders, if you like. And what they did was obviously take a number of guys from the 3 battalions and take them and form the Pathfinders. So the first element of the Pathfinders was a collective group of the battalion's patrols platoons with some 216 signallers, 9 Squadron, Royal Engineers, but at that time it was restricted to the brigade.
Right. Okay. They've opened it up now, haven't they? I believe
yeah, we'll get into that later, Chris, because it's significantly different to what it was back then. Back then it was just beg, borrow, steal. It was real. It was real sort of, undermanned, underfunded, under-resourced, but just packed with capable people who made it work. So halfway through Belfast, I knew before I'd gone to Belfast, but I was only 20, and there was no way I was ever going to get let go to go on SF selection. You wouldn't, the battalion would never let you do an injustice to yourself, and it wouldn't embarrass itself by letting people go who probably would never pass. So really, I was like, right, well, I want that next challenge. I want that next sort of adrenaline rush. So I volunteered for PF. There was about 7 of us that went from 3 Para on that island tour on my course.
Wow, yeah, it was, like I say, it was kind of not overly publicised. So I hear anyway. I've only ever had one other Pathfinder on the kind of podcast, and you'll probably know him, Tom Blakey.
Tom, didn't you?
Yeah, I had Tom on, yeah. And it was kind of, I didn't quite early on in the podcast. I need to do a catch up with him, actually. But so I got his perspective of Pathfinder selection. And because obviously, again, it's not overly publicised, like everyone knows about SES selection. Can you just describe for the viewers what Pathfinder selection is and how it's broken down, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So again, it's kind of grown. It's matured now. It's matured into a different animal than mine. There's no sort of difference in the kind of approach. It's kind of really over a number of phases. So back then in sort of 1990, it was open to the brigade, and you got the odd army volunteer, let me say, but we never got anyone from the Navy, and you never got anyone from the Air Force. Now, what they said was, if people do the Pathfinder course and they pass, then they will get a maroon beret and they will go and do their basic wings course. They don't have to do P Company, because Pathfinder selection, obviously, like SAS selection, was deemed to be more robust. So if you pass one, the transition, you got the beret. So which drew a lot of anger anyway from the battalions, and that was always our biggest fight. Trying to appease the battalion guys that they were doing a harder course. If you looked at P Company in isolation, forget the depot and the beasting, what makes you para reg. Yeah. If you looked at P Company in isolation, like the all arms, if you like, if people passed 3 weeks all arms, but came on PF selection and it took them 7 weeks or 6 weeks. So week 1 in Aldershot was designed to replicate P Company tests. So for instance, you had the P Company 10 miler, it was always slightly more weight and slightly quicker.
Right.
So, the PF 10 miler was £40 with a pass mark of 1 hour 40.
It's going some, that, isn't it?
It was going some, yeah. And so then you had the 8 miler, which was £55 with a rifle and pass mark 1 hour 30. You then had the 2 miler, the CFT, which was the same, 30, I think it was £30 or £35 in your belt kit, weapon, helmet, pass mark, I think it was, well, it was 18 minutes to pass, but obviously the closer you got to 17, the better it was. And then you had a series of runs and beastings on the training area. You had a gym session. So that first week of PF selection was fitness intertwined with some basic navigation, some basic understanding of signals, a couple of lessons on R2I and what that meant. And then really preparing you to go to Wales. So obviously during that first week, there's a series of cuts where the people VW, voluntary withdrawal, or at the end of that first week, the staff make a decision on really who hasn't physically got what it takes to go to Brecon.
Right.
It's then a case, mate, you're on the coach, you're down to Brecon, and you're going through a series of group marches led by one of the DS, usually in groups of 4 or 5, depending on the number of courses, and starting sort of 20k. So you would do a 20k group tab over the Elan Valley, each person taking a leg, making sure that you can navigate, the DS looking at you to see if they can leave you alone on the hills. Have you got it physically, and have you got the skills to map read on your own when the mist comes in? The next day, so obviously at the end of that day, you go back to Senny Bridge, get ready for the next march the next day, and that might be, again, 20, 24, 25k over the Black Mountain, the next day over the beacons. So you used to do 3 DS-led walkabouts. At the end of the 3, you were then kind of went into test week, which was 5 marches then. Those marches were pretty much replicas of test week on SF selection. Yeah. So you would do the fan dance, same weight, same timings. You would do what used to be then point to point. You would do another march they used to call pipeline. You'd do a march up on the Elan Valley, usually finishing that 4th march at about 5 in the afternoon. Get your head down and then be on the coaches at midnight to start endurance.
Nice.
Which is the same march, same weight. So it's 64 kilometres, 20 hours or below, with £50 in your Bergen, plus your water and scoff on top of that.
Yeah, wow.
And then obviously those 5 marches are all individual. At any point during those 5 test marches, you can VW, or if you technically get a red card, you don't make the timings, you get a gypsy's warning, you're allowed to do the next march, and if you fail that one, then you're off.
Right. Okay. So it is like a cut down version, basic selection. So in a way, you're thrown straight in, because selection arguably is a build up. They're all designed to be a build up, aren't they? Within reason, but you seem to be thrown in at the deep end, really, with Pathfinder selection there, don't you? You've obviously got to be very, very fit before you start.
The biggest problem that the PF always had was people coming unprepared.
Yeah.
And again, this is not a myth. Everybody in the world had the SAS SF diary for marches. Everybody knew where the checkpoints are. That it doesn't matter. I used to say to people, I don't care if you know you're going to the top of the fan, then you go into fan 4, then you go into the Taliban. I don't care. You've still got to go up the hill. Yeah. You've still got to do the distance. The fact that you know where you're going doesn't really mean a lot. If the mist comes in, then you are in trouble.
Yeah.
So it is that progressive wearing you down, injury, that mind-numbing boredom of being on your own, chasing the panel in front of you, wondering, trying to conserve energy, wondering if you're going to go over on a baby's head, not getting any food down your neck and having to stuff your face on a night, then your dry kit, and then drying your Bergen out, and then getting motivated up the next day. So it's not just about the marches, it's about the whole toll that it takes on your psyche.
Yeah, it's kind of just not jacking, isn't it? And then that's the difficult part. When times, look, human nature, when things get hard, people want to kind of give up. They want to get warm. They want to just go and curl up in a nice warm bed or get some food. And that's what all these kind of set apart is the mindset, the self-motivation. That's what they want, isn't it? The self-motivation. When it's tough, you can crack on and not have someone trying to motivate you. Self-motivation at the end of the day, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, look, the thing that any kind of selection, whether it be special forces, whether it be for the Royal Marine BPT, whether it's for the ML course, whether it's parachute regiment, it doesn't really matter. The idea behind any selection process is at any point you can leave.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind it. That's the reason there's no incentivization. There's no, on the wagon, off the wagon. Here's your next checkpoint, off you go. That's the, people would probably stay on the course if they were forced to stay.
Yeah.
That sounds really bizarre, but if it was an order.
Yeah, I get you.
Do you know what I'm saying? But the ability that you can go to the scoff at 5 o'clock in the cookhouse, go back to the Nissan huts in Sennybridge or wherever and go, actually, I don't fancy that tomorrow. My battalion's in Cyprus. I'm going back to Akatiri tomorrow.
Yeah. No, that is like you say.
Yeah, that's it, mate,
Yeah, it's just that ability. You can jack at any point. There's no one screaming in your ear saying, right, go. It's completely up to you. Do you want to be there or not? And I suppose that's the psychological thing that kind of, rules it, I suppose. So after you've done the fitness side of hills phase, you go on to like a continuation phase, a bit like 2-2, where you start learning you're working in small teams, because PF is synonymous with working in very, very small teams out on their own. Kind of that's the thing, innit?
Yeah. So after endurance, there's a bit of a cull to see who's left. And then whoever's left then goes generally. So for my course, straight after that, we pretty much went on to fieldcraft and tactics.
Yeah.
So again, it's back to basics. It's in the classroom, looking at RV procedures, obstacle crossing, lie-up drills, ambush drills, and then so it's theory, practical. And the idea is that they look at you kind of blank slate. The expectation is if you're infantry, which the vast majority of my course was. On my course, we had a couple of Royal Engineers and a couple of 216 guys. The rest were from the 3 battalions. So there's an expectation that there's a standard there already. But again, it's just looking at how you interact then, how you, deal with people that may not have the same skills as you, how you work as a group, how you, accept that so-and-so's the patrol commander, there's the medic, there's the lead scout. And it's a period of instruction. So it's pretty much out, a morning in the classroom and then up on Sennybridge training area for the rest of the day and the evening doing low-level tactics based around, back then, a 4-man patrol. Obviously now things have significantly changed. But back then, working in 4-man patrols, so that was really it, Chris. That's the kind, and really it's quite slow because people are injured. So it's a little bit of rest and recuperation while you're in the camp and out, but every night you're returning. There's only a couple of nights in that week when you're out, you do an ambush, but generally it's a bit of rest and recuperation while they download on you the skills that they want you to have. At the end of that week, you do a sort of 24, 36-hour exercise, which is like a top and tail, if you like, just to make sure that you've assimilated everything and you're ready for the next phase. So that exercise first try, again, it's a walkthrough, DS-led, not DS so much DS-led, but the DS are with you and you are allowed to make mistakes. They kind of, get in with you if you're doing something wrong. So it's still a bit of learning on the job, if you like. And again, at the end of that phase, if everyone's still continuing, you then move on to range week. which is everything that you've done the week before, whether it be contact drills, obstacle crossing, but now on the range, now live. So it's pretty much down on, A range, D range, X range, 4-man teams going through everything from CQB all the way through to pairs fire and manoeuvre, then up to sort of patrol or half fire team, whatever you want to call it, fire and manoeuvre. It's then you do introduction to claymore mines, you fire a few, exotic weapons, bit of grenade, on my course, fire the 66, fire the 84, and generally, again, just sort of, making sure that you're comfortable with live ammunition in close proximity to others. Because, again, there are people that might have spent time in a unit and never really done sort of live fire tactical training to that level when you are an arm's length away from a person who's, emptying a magazine into it and then getting up and moving. So it's a confidence thing. They're looking at you to see how you work under those conditions.
Yeah, there's certainly live firing and blank firing, very, very, very different. You go through the same thing, but for some people, firing live ammunition and knowing you've got that dangerous kind of weapon that's going to kill someone is kind of, it's a big deal. And people do, I've seen it. I've seen people panic when they're firing live ammunition, when you should treat blank exactly the same as you do live when it comes to safety. I'm sure you'll agree with that. But people do panic when it's live, don't they? That's just part and parcel.
Well, they do panic, and the other thing as well is, as you say, Chris, that'll be the first time. It was the first time for me I'd ever, worked as a 4-man team. When you're getting up, when you're peeling left or right, when you're kneeling next to someone, when you're firing over the top of someone or very to the side. So it is about awareness as well of what's happening around you. So they're looking for that situational awareness. They're looking for your ability to control your emotions. They're looking for how you, simple things like, it may sound really strange, but have you remembered to put your safety catch on before you move? So if you can conscientiously remember stuff like that, it means that you haven't been overwhelmed by the situation. You've still got that presence, that thought process to be able to sort of analyse the dangers around you. One being, have I got my safety catch on or off? So there's lots of stuff in there, Chris, and the DS are all over you.
They have to be. It's intense training, isn't it,
Well, from a safety point of view, but also watching everything you do, from your facial expressions, your body language. Are you screaming and shouting at the guy because you think you're right and he's wrong? Are you blaming him for the drill collapsing? So they're looking at that sort of shared responsibility rather than isolating someone and going, you're a mong. So there's lots of stuff in there. Because again, the idea, Chris, is that in 2 weeks' time, you're going to be in the PF in a team of 4 people who are vastly more experienced with you. What's that dynamic like? Are you disruptive? Are you narcissistic? Are you are you an introvert, an extrovert? What are you? Can you self-motivate yourself, or do you need to be told to put your boobs on? There's lots of things like that, Chris, and that's part and parcel of small team tactics in any unit.
Yeah, absolutely. Teamwork's key. We know that without a doubt. And you will get them larger than life characters. So, you've passed PF.
Yeah.
You've turned up at Pathfinders or Pathfinder HQ. Where were they based at that time?
Oh, the band room in Montgomery Lines. I don't know if you ever knew where it was, Chris, but obviously the main guard room as you come up the hill into Montgomery Lines, if you kind of look left 10 o'clock, there was a sort of little small, looked like a half an egg carton with a little fence around it. That's what used to be the band room, dear me. Right. When I think back to those days and to what they are now, it is an evolution on an industrial scale.
Yeah, well, you'll know I was in, late 90s, like I say, and I remember it being really, really under sort of funded the Reg or the British Army in general. You know, I say it all the time. I remember doing the first Afghan tour in green kit because there was not enough money to buy desert kit and stuff like that. You know, so I can only imagine you go back a further sort of 7 or 8 years when you've joined PF that there just wasn't a lot of money in the army, was there? And a lot of stuff were underfunded.
No, it was ridiculous. I mean, so obviously at the end of selection, you get your DZ flash and then you join. So I went back to battalion, handed me kit in, and then came back to Aldershot. And that was the last time I ever went back to 3 para. You know, so, and then your your training begins, if you like. You go through a period of continuation training. So straight on to back then. So let me talk about what it was back then. It's pretty similar now, but obviously there might have been a few changes, but straight onto a 2-week signals course. So you're learning the radios. At the time, the PF had the PRC 319, which was the same radio that UKSF had. It had a different coding system. The battalions had backcore. We had a different coding system, a different offline encryption system, a couple of different radios. So again, it's learning the dynamics of long distance communications. Like the battalions, you know, you're in the sections, you're in the companies, in the platoons, you're only communicating to company HQ, we're then communicating to battalion HQ, relatively small distances. The PF depends on how you would look at things. Could be communicating from Africa back to the UK ahead of the main force. So everybody needed the skill to be able to understand long-range communications, whether that be HF or satellite communications. The PSC 510 had just come in then, the very early renditions of SATCOM. So there was a lot to learn. I'd never been a signaller. I was a Tom in 3 para. I never had a radio. You know, you never got a radio till you were a Lance Jack, and you only got a 349, didn't you? So I'd never seen, you know, so for me it was quite alien. You know, we were up in 216's signals rooms every morning doing Morse code. To pass the continuation training, you had to be able to send and receive Morse at 8 words a minute, which, when you've never done it, it's horrendous.
I still struggle with backco. I don't know about you. You remember backco now? We talk about that now. It's mental, isn't it?
Honestly, yeah. You know, it gets to the stage where I'm walking around hearing noises and I'm thinking, is that Morse or am I just imagining
That's your
stuff?
tinnitus. That's your tinnitus. Well, I know a good company that does hearing claims, Steve, if you ever want to do it. But no, fair play to you.
Yeah, so you do your 2-week signals carder and then straight on to medical carder again. So, you know, and again, I'll speak as if nobody knows. It's really 4 roles within a patrol: lead scout, you know, technically up front, navigation, bit of demolitions. Then you had the patrol commander. Then you had the sort of signaller, and then bringing up the rear was generally the medic. Each person has that independent skill. So the medic would be medically trained. The rest of the platoon of the patrol would be medically aware, so that if he went down, we could pick up his kit and it wouldn't be alien. The patrol commander, by dint of their experience, 2, 3, 4 years in the platoon, would have done a stint at each one, so they would be able to sort of oversee the other 3 roles, if you like. So generally, the new blokes get the lead scout because it's, you know, navigation. You do so we'd do a DEMS course. So in-house, we had a couple of Royal Engineers. We'd go down to Brecon, go down into the DEMS pit for a week and do DEMS training. You know, so we'd go through the whole process of improvised charges, making improvised claymores, taking you through sort of rapid cratering kit, the difference between, you know, uses of deck cord, how to make a charge, use of sort of RDX, use of sheet explosives, the whole sort of range of military ordnance that was available to you, and then how to use it in a sabotage type scenario. As one of the roles of the PF is to insert into an operational theatre, bring in the main force, the inload of combat power, and then push ahead of that main force, reconnaissance, sabotage, identification of targets, taking out high value targets. So one of the roles then might have been sabotage, railway lines, cratering, dropping bridge. Well, you can't carry enough explosives to drop a bridge, but to make it structurally unsound, shall we say.
Do enough damage to disrupt.
Do enough damage to slow it up, yeah. I mean, you're talking about relatively small quantities of PE, so you're not really going to do a lot.
Yeah. No, fair play, fair play. So you spent about 7 years, am I right in saying, in PF from 90 to 97, where you went from a private soldier up to full screw, and then you did the career courses. Do you go on the normal career juniors and stuff like that? Do you do the Lance Corporal course, or do you just go on juniors? How does that work?
No. So basically, you do everything. So, for instance, when I almost immediately after passing PF selection, I got sent on 2 para machine guns cadre. So what used to happen is the blokes in the battalion, we would then the blokes in the PF would go on support company cadres, because we would have access, if need be, to guns. In order to be able to sight a gun, in order to be able to recce a fire support position, you have to know the capabilities of the weapon systems you're putting in place or that you're trying to locate. So I went on 2 para machine guns. Guys would go away on the mortars, whichever 2 battalions were in role. So you'd go away and do the anti-tank cadre. Guys would go away and do the mortar cadre. I did machine guns. So I was in the PF. I went there as a Tom, and I think it was off the top of my head now, probably 1993. I went on junior Brecon. So yes, we all go on junior Brecon. It's exactly the same career trajectory. There's no shortcuts with career courses. So I went on PF selection. I went on junior Brecon in the January of 93, I think my course was. The issue that we had in the PF at that time was we weren't on the sort of British Army's orbit, if you like. So I was technically still on the books of 3 para. So the guys who were in the platoon from 1 para and 2 para, likewise, they still belong to those battalions. So the CO was technically loaning you out because you came off his establishment, which when you're a Tom is not a big shake to a CO. But if he's losing a Lance Jack's post or a Corporal's post, then he's a full screw down and they don't like it. So we had real troubles getting promoted in those early days.
Right, okay. Well, that kind of...
When I went on junior Brecon, I took a place from a 3 para guy.
Right, okay. So, that's going to ruffle feathers, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I mean, look, the brigadier or the chief of staff at 5 Brigade would tell the battalion COs that they had to allocate 2 places on junior Brecon, 2 places on senior Brecon to the PF, and it doesn't go down well.
No, I can imagine. Obviously, we'll move on now because obviously I'm sure you follow. I know. I mean, later on when we talk about like Pathfinders later on, I'm sure you know how they kind of run now and guys and stuff. So we'll touch on that in a bit. It's like how they've evolved, if you like. Yeah. But, so you've gone. Where's your career progression? Because obviously you've not stayed in PF. You've then gone back over to 1 para, am I right? Is that what you had to do? So you had to could you not stay in PF? And what was your kind of logic, or what was your reasoning really for going back to one of the Power Age battalions? Okay,
so internally, the sort of rule, if you like, was the PF was that the senior positions in the platoon would always be badged Parachute Regiment, so that we maintain that sort of tie. So the platoon sergeant, the colour sergeant, the ops warrant officer would always be badged Para-Reg and always a former member of the platoon.
Right.
So that we kept that link, and also, senior guys then were mixing with the battalions. So it was an identification process. So when I was a corporal, I'd come off junior Brecon, and the lad who was the platoon sergeant then would have got the colourman's role, the colourman would have got the ops warrant officer. So they said, right, Steve, you're going to be the next platoon sergeant of the PF in 2 years' time. So while the platoon sergeant then carried out his 2-year tour, I went back, and we had to go back to a battalion to get a tick in the box. Because again, back to the whole establishment thing, being a platoon sergeant in the PF didn't count as one of your career postings, if you like.
Right.
So we could only go back to a battalion that was in roll. 3 para at the time were down in Dover. So I could choose between 1 or 2 para. Quite a lot of guys that I'd gone through 3 para with had now moved over to 1 para. So I was like, well, 1 para in Aldershot, they're in North Camp. I know quite a lot of lads in 1. I didn't know so many in 2 back then. So I said, right, I'll go back to 1 para. And that was it. It was purely that and that alone that drove me back to 1 para, to get my platoon sergeant's tick, if you like.
And you landed there at a pretty good time, because obviously you ended up going to Kosovo when that kicked off as well. So bit of luck involved there, because obviously 1 para went with 3 para, didn't they? And that was kind of a big, I think a big milestone at that time for the Reg, because all that had happened prior to that really was kind of Northern Ireland for a lot of years since the Falklands, and then Kosovo kicked off, and then that put the Reg firmly back on the map again, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 1 para had an amazing in the 2 years I was there. I got there, I'd been there about a week, and we had an emergency tour, a trip to Belfast to do the marching season. We were there about 12 days. We came back, and then warned off for Kosovo. And then obviously we'll get on to them going to Sierra Leone. But they had an amazing 2 years with them, And as you said, so Upper Agricola into Kosovo, yeah, amazing. And a lot of people have wrote about, what went on with General Sir Mike Jackson and his relationship with Sacker, Wesley Clark at the time, and what the implications were of what would have happened to 1 para battle group if we'd have got on those helicopters and tried to take Pristina Airport. Yeah. So, yeah, it was just absolutely chaos.
It was bonkers. I'm yet to do a second part with retired Major General Adrian Freer, who was obviously 5 Airborne Brigade at the time, I believe.
Yeah.
I want to talk to him about that, but it was a bit chaotic. We remember it all unfolding. I think I was 2 para then, and I remember I think we were on a short island tour. I remember seeing it and thinking, them gits. We were devastated that 1 and 3 had gone. We were absolutely devastated.
You wouldn't have been devastated sat on the back of them ramps of them helicopters when they were throwing bandoliers at you and law 80s and going, right, carry as much of that as you can. And by the way, have you all wrote blueies?
Yeah. Yeah, well, fair. Well, I had the footage. You've seen people tabbing up the road with the weight on the back and that. And yeah, I must admit, there was envy, and there was a bit like deep down you went, yeah, that looks a bit tough.
It was, it was a surreal couple of hours in a hot sunny field in a beautiful country.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I say, we watched it unfold, but obviously Kosovo's been fairly well documented. And then you've gone, what I want to talk to you about, what I want to talk to you about, because I can relate a little bit to Sierra Leone. I was one of the companies, I was D Company 2 para that was attached to 1 para in Sierra Leone. So I can relate to Palliser because I was there. And obviously the conditions, because it's, Africa renowned for being hot, tropical, horrible. But it's like what a lot of people don't know is the kind of nastiness and the sheer kind of brutality of the West Side Boys and the kind of the factions out there and how brutal and the atrocities that they carried out. Because it was horrendous what they were doing, wasn't it?
Yeah. And again, I suppose I often say to people, if you want to get in and again, without delving into Hollywood, I often say to people, just watch Blood Diamond. They're not too far off the mark. There's a little bit of honey poured on it for that. But the sort of idea about this hunt and search for alluvial diamonds, and the sort of brutality against their own people, the amputations, the rape, the murders, the beatings. It is that, and as you know yourself, Chris, I say to people, if there was a personification of evil on earth, post the Second World War, they were it.
Yeah.
Along with lots of other, groups like that around the world and sort of belligerents. But yeah, evil people, evil.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you were involved in quite a big incident out there. Like, we'll talk about sort of the military cross and stuff. So yeah, please expand on, because I have read about it, but I'd like to hear how it unfolded from the horse's mouth, as it were. So yeah, tell me about the kind of how you ended up winning a military cross, if you don't mind, Steve.
Yeah. So when the PF got there, so once obviously one para were being inloaded into Lungi Airport, it was very disjointed, as you can imagine. That sort of first few hours, the establishment of Lieutenant Colonel Gibson's sort of HQ, the idea that the UN were already there. There was lots of white vehicles and tents already on the side of the airport. The airport was still functioning, and all of a sudden these Hercs are coming in and guys are bomb bursting. And it was real uncertainty about what the role was. There was no rules of engagement. There wasn't any uniformed enemy to fire at. We hadn't been given any ammunition. Nobody had any food. You had a water bottle. It was all kind of just, let's get on the ground and we'll figure it out. Power edge, and when it's broken, we'll wrap some masking tape around it, which is great to an extent because that's what the guys thrive on. So within that sort of first 24 hours, we'd been put on a helicopter and flown over the estuary towards Freetown. And guys had gone really to help secure the British Embassy. The idea being that the RUF, the Revolutionary United Front, which were the predecessors, if you like, to the West Side Boys, were marching from their stronghold in Port Loko through the jungle, up the tracks, through the villages, and moving towards the airfield and eventually into Freetown to take over. Raping, pillaging, mutilating, murder, all along the way. The idea was then that entitled personnel, and they use that phrase, meaning British passport holders and anybody else that wanted to get on those aircraft, would have been flown back over by helicopter to Lungi, put on a C-130 and then sent to Dakar in Senegal. And at that point, with their hold all and their passport, they would have been given some options about what happens next. The idea, just get them out of Sierra Leone. So that first 24 hours was just over the other side. Half of the platoon had gone to the British Embassy. The rest of us were bashed up in the grounds of the Mami Yoko Hotel right next to the swimming pool. Bashes against the side of the tennis courts, just waiting for something to happen and to be told what to do. The next morning we'd gone over, we'd had some patrols out on the ground around the airfield, putting in kind of standing OPs, if you like. Remember, NVGs weren't very good. We didn't have any, we had iron sights on the weapons. NVGs don't work in that humidity. We didn't know who the enemy were, so we're just in a static position 10 metres off the side of a track, watching movement towards the airfield, and then reporting on if there was anything relevant to report on. The next day, it all just happened so quick. It was everybody back on the helicopter, back over to Lungi Airfield. We got off at the airfield. The OC of the platoon came over, laid a map on the bonnet of a Land Rover and went, we're here, we're going there, and we're on them 2 helicopters in about an hour, brief the blokes. And that was it. We then obviously went on the scavenge, trying to get whatever ammunition, that we could from the RQ at the time, Mick Robson. We would go, so Mick, just give us what you've got. And it was kind of stealing, really. Bandolier here, Belt the Link there, a couple of 84s, bit of PE, couple of deaths, and that was it. There was nothing else in country. The battalion had moved that quick that the Operation Ammunition hadn't even left the UK.
It's about right.
It was about right, yeah. That was crazy, mate. I had a 51 and 18 Alum rounds, no HE in country. So, and then it was like, right, on the bus. So on board two CH-47s, the two SF ones that were there at the time, and sort of a 45-minute flight into the jungle to a village, to the village of Lungiloy. The idea being that this was kind of the last trading post that the RUF would have to come through. The jungle was mangrove, it was swampy, it was impenetrable, impassable to vehicles, barely passable on foot. So really everybody was just using the tracks, and they just were sand tracks, slightly cambered, flooded during the rain that happened every day for a couple of hours, and then they dry out and just become like Long Valley. We were going to be positioned in this village for 48 hours to act as forward observation, to trigger any kind of any information that needed to be sent back to the airport while they rounded up these entitled persons. So one para were just distributed throughout the city, Freetown, rounded people up, patrolling the streets, and we were in the jungle, and it was going to be 48 hours. We were then told we'd be picked up and brought back and retasked. And so fast forward, we're now in the jungle, mate. We're now landed in the middle of this jungle, and just in front of this village in some cleared areas, and it was just about 4:30 in the afternoon, 90% humidity, and 26 of us with grab bags, belt kit, and weapons, and that was it. 48 hours scoff, couple of water bottles, and really no real plan other than get in the village, get in some temporary defensive positions, report back on any movement towards the airport, monitor village life, listen to the locals, try to gather some intelligence, and feed it back to us.
And then what happened?
So we got to the 48-hour point. All that we'd been doing is, VCPs, people would then start to come in the village, down through the tracks, coming out of the jungle, into the village from the surrounding villages. Port Loco was a kind of, off the top of my head, probably 25, 30 kilometres into the jungle, kind of northeast of us. And people were then coming back in and saying, we've come from this village, we've come from this village. They've raided our village. So the village when we got there was about 500-600 people and half a platoon of Nigerian UN soldiers who'd been there for 6 months, had no communication, had no visits, no resupply. They took the uniforms off, put the weapons in the hut, married local girls.
Wow.
So we arrived, they quickly put the uniform back on, and they brought out these rusty FN rifles with a magazine each with about 10 rounds in. And so at the 48-hour point, we got a radio message from Lungi. We had a rear detachment in Lungi who said, basically, it's open-ended. You're going to stay there until the operation is completed. It's migrated a little bit. It's morphed, into something else. We're still rounding people up. And by the way, all intelligence suggests that a large rebel force are making their way through you towards the airport. As you know then, Chris, mindset changes. You go from temporary defensive positions to something more substantial. You increase your patrol patterns. We're then forging our hearts and minds, and I'll go on to that because that's what saved the day. Another thing that the British Army does really well, and Power Edge, hearts and minds, this American sort of thought process that, you've got to be a peacekeeper, you've got to be a war fighter, you've got to be a counterinsurgency guy, and then you've got to be a sort of enabler at the end of it. So, yeah, information coming in. Bear in mind, we still hadn't had any ammunition upgrade. We hadn't had any deliveries. And we're just getting a feel for the place now, putting patrol patterns out and then just listening and watching these people coming in, sleeping on the floor in the jungle. You know, local villagers now come in. We'd had a bit of a repertoire with the village elder. We'd talked them into clearing the front of the jungle in front of us. There was only one way the rebels could come. If they were going to come in vehicles, they'd have to come straight at us down the track. So clear back the bush in front of us, get some arcs of fire, open the fields of fire, sight the guns, look at the best defensive positions possible, and then with patrolling, hearts and minds, a little bit of local information, building up a pattern of life and then waiting for the inevitable. As you know, and anybody that knows it's been in the jungle, you know, we didn't have dry kit. The perfect scenario, isn't it, is at the end of the day, you take your wet kit off, you get into your dry kit, and your body gets a chance to recover. We'd gone in, there was no room on the heli, so it was grab bags. Blokes had a grab bag, and they had one piece of warm kit, you know, a bit more ammunition in the back, bit of scoff, and that was it. So we're sleeping on the jungle floor, so you're soaking wet all day, and you're not really having a chance to recover on a night. 6, 7 days in now, still sleeping on the floor, your body's starting to fall apart, aren't you? You're getting crotch rot, you're getting prickly heat, you're getting trench foot, you're getting all kinds of bites and scratches and cuts. And so it's a degrading process, isn't it? All the time, taking away from your state of alertness and sort of bearing down on you while you're trying to manage the situation that's happening around you. So it was we'd been there for, I want to say 9 days. So we'd gone for 2. We're now on day 8. So the 17th of May, about 02:45 in the morning, signaller wakes me up. So we'd had 4 patrols along the front, 2 patrols to the left of this main track, 2 patrols on the right, spread out. We'd had local villagers cut down the jungle to the front. They'd sharpened sticks to make punji fields, so we'd made like handmade obstacles so we could slow people down. They'd been doing a lot for us, and as I said, without them, I dread to think what would have happened if we hadn't have had that assistance from them. And guy woke me up, signaller woke me up. I was laid on the floor, you know, belt kit as a pillow, and he woke me up. Steve, maximise, which was the code word for there's been, you know, detection to the front. At that point, you know, kind of knelt up. It was still pitch black, and almost instantly heard this one round, just a sort of low velocity bang. And then nothing for a second or two, and then the gun opened up. So we had a forward centre position, and the guy who was on the GPMG at the front had opened up. To relay what had caused that is he'd witnessed people crawling up the track. So they were in the camber off the track, crawling towards his position. We were on very tight rules of engagement, can't fire unless fired upon, typical. This guy, the forward guy, had knelt up, AK-47, pulled the trigger and technically got a stoppage, fired one round and got a stoppage. So the guy on the front sentry position had obviously then took that as, you know, safe to catch off, and then began opening up on them. That sort of then brought everybody to life, you know. As I said, I had a 51mm mortar with me. So in my grab bag, I had 18 Illum rounds for the mortar. What I'd missed out there is on that day of the 16th, we'd had a Royal Marine captain come in. HMS Ocean was sailing towards Freetown. 4-2 Commando were on there on what they called the Amphibious Readiness Group. They were going to do a relief in place with Power Edge. So he'd been flown ashore to see where they could put their patrols platoon, with a view to maybe doing a relief in place with us. He was meant to be on the ground for an hour. When he got in, they'd sent a radio message saying he can't be picked up. That the sort of, I think the Sea King had been retasked, and he was going to stay overnight with us. So he was laid next to me on the jungle floor when it all went loud. So I was like, right, come with me. We need to get the Illume up. Pitch black, guys firing into the jungle. So obviously, as you know yourself, can't put the mortar up in the trees. So we needed to get out of the jungle in front of where the guys were, off to a flank, so we could put the Illume up. So that's what happened, Chris. We started crawling, him and I. The guys are opening up. There's fire coming. That's been coordinated, and the Royal Marine captain is now with me, and we crawl forward. I'm dragging the mortar. He's dragging the grab bag full of mortar rounds. And we get out beyond the forward our position. So we're out of the jungle, out in the open now, basically just in front of where the cleared area was, the Punji's field, if you like. And basically from there, mate, started putting mortar Illume rounds up over the jungle, over the cleared area, so blokes could fire at the targets. And then, as you know, Chris, it's about conservation of ammunition. We only had 300. Well, we had probably about 300 rounds a man. Each man had sort of 5 magazines and a bandolier. That's all we had.
It's not going to last long, is it?
No, mate. I mean, look, if you went off the textbook and if you're looking at rapid rate of fire at 30 rounds a minute, you've got 10 minutes of fighting.
Yeah.
So in our mind, before we deployed into the jungle, we'd kind of known, they'd told us there was a very, very strong possibility. If you don't get into a hot landing site, you're going to get hit at some point. They're making the way towards you. My conversations with Brigadier Richards afterwards was that we were deliberately exposed to entice them onto the position, which, the idea was that when we deployed, there was going to be a platoon of 1 para on QRF. So there was going to be a CH-47, a Chinook, on them on call. So in my mind, I'm going, right, it's probably going to take 5 minutes to wake it up. It's going to take 5 to 10 minutes to get 30 paratroopers on a CH-47, and it's 35 minutes flying time. So we've got to be able to hold out for an hour, regardless of what happens. An hour, minimum. With that in mind, then, I'm now putting the Illume up. Guys are picking off targets, and so the rebels backed off and then come back again. So we kind of had 3 assaults on the position. The Royal Marine and I, we were moving position, putting up the mortar rounds, and again, even in the dark, you just become a bullet magnet because there's an element of smoke, there's an element of flash. There's 2 guys kneeling up outside of the trees, so we were exposed, and then it was just coordinating the fire, making sure everybody's firing at things that can hit, taking the adrenaline out of the situation. So after about the third time they'd started, engaging us, it all went silent. So the Royal Marine and I crawled back to the sort of HQ where I met up with the Ops Warrant Officer then. Him and I had a discussion, and I said, right, I think the QRF's on the way. We'd already pre-recorded a HLS for them, which was about 200 metres to the south of the village, closer towards the airfield. So I said, right, I'll take 1 guy from each patrol. I'll push back down the track into the jungle and mark the HLS. While you stay here, and he said, right, I'll do ammunition distribution, check casualties, and see what happens next. The problem we had, Chris, is that the village, you could have been enveloped. There was enough movement ability around the village for them to get to the back of us. If they had done, then we would have been isolated, obviously, with nowhere to go. So we're obviously alive to the fact of how much ammunition's been fired. There's villagers running about like loonies. A girl had got shot in the shoulder. I dispatched Bry Budd, VC, posthumous. He went and treated her because Bry was a patrol medic at the time. So he's treating this girl in the middle of this village. There's people running around everywhere. The Nigerians, we've sent them to the back of the village to man trenches so they didn't shoot anyone. And then the four of us, me and three of the blokes, went back down this track. So it's still dark now. It's probably about 4:35, maybe 5:30 in the morning. The first shards of light are coming through the canopy on the horizon. So I've got an IR Firefly. The blokes are down in the ground. You know, we still don't know if they're moving around us. So, as you know yourself, mate, the jungle's crazy on the night. You're imagining everything. And we're about 200 metres south of the blokes now. Probably been there about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, you know, and then you know the distinctive sound of the Chinook, you know, coming in.
Nice sounder.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And then obviously dawn breaking, saw it come in. 7th Squadron, wasn't it? Came in on the IR Firefly and just bounced this Chinook into this open space. Outrageous, you know, flying. Bounced the Chinook in. So I'm kneeling literally on the nose now, looking up at the two pilots. And I'm thinking to myself, in about 20 seconds, there's going to be 30 paratroopers off the back of this. And then we can really sort of, you know, take it to them if they come back. Yeah. So 10 seconds, 20, 30 seconds, I'm thinking, no, they should have been off now. That Chinook should be in the air now. After about a minute, I'm thinking, right, this doesn't feel right. Chinook's still there. So it gets up, moves down the side of the fuselage to the back of the aircraft where the ramp is down, gets onto the back of the aircraft with the red lights on to be met by the Adge of one para, who was an ex-PF officer, great guy. Obviously, due to his relationship with us on the ground, they've sent him to give us the bad news that there isn't no QRF, nobody's coming, and there isn't any ammunition.
Brilliant.
Yeah. You know, there's this, you know, I used to say this with a couple of guys, you know, whenever anything goes wrong, you sit there and you go, But yeah, we had a brief discussion and he was on the money, you know, and he just said, look, Steve, there isn't anybody. They're all retasked. There isn't anyone. The battle group is absolutely stretched. You're on your own, really. And that was it. Got off the helicopter and the helicopter took off. So I've now got to go back to the blokes on the ground who were saying, where is everyone, Steve? Where are they all? And I'm like, right, let's get back to the village. So we tabbed up, went back into the village, met up with the ops warrant officer, Wag Wardle, X2 para guy. You know, we had a great relationship. We knelt down and we're sort of nose to nose. And I just went, there ain't anybody coming, man. And again, para-reg, you know, you roll your shoulders. What can you do? We aren't leaving. There's, you know, what is it? Well, there's no QRF. So, right, what do we do now? How do we solidify our position? How do we consolidate? How do we reissue ammunition? How do we take the fight back to the enemy? The classic, how do we win back the initiative? What do we do now? So just getting done, you know, the thought processes is, you know, we've probably fired now, you know, at least 150, 200 rounds a man. So we're down to about a third of ammunition left. And we're saying, but if it's light, then we can pick them off. You know, so we're in a better position. We're below ground level, we're in trenches, and we've got, you know, the ability, we're better shots. So let's hang around. The other thought in that, Chris, is these villagers had been helping us for 9 days. There was now about 1,000 people in that village sleeping all over in the mud. You know, your natural thought, your empathy, your humanity is, if we leave these, they'll be massacred.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we made the decision. We weren't going anywhere, and it was, we were going to stay and fight on come what may, in the hope that we would get a QRF at some point, or at least an ammunition resupply.
Right. So, like, moving forward from that, like, so obviously conservation of ammunition. You've said before you've got like not a lot of ammo there per person. So, how did you kind of organise it in a way? Did they then sort of slack off, or did they come? What happened when first light come? How did you kind of tackle the situation, and how long did you have to hold out for?
Right, so we got to first light, and obviously the village has now come alive, and it's almost as if nothing happened. They're going about their daily business now. So we're still on sort of tenterhooks. We're still guys we've redistributed the ammunition so that it's even now. Each guy's generally got what they've got. And about sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock, we got a message over the radio saying that the QRF was inbound. So in the period of darkness, from the sort of first initial contacts up to that point, they'd almost like melted away. The villagers come back to life, but again, they were wearing tracksuit. They're mingling in with other villagers. So we're now at the villages, and we're now saying to the chief, if the villagers don't recognise anyone, especially male fighting age, coming into that village, we need to know. So again, I went down, went down to the sort of HLS, and a Chinook came in. Now, obviously, on the Chinook was one of the companies from One Para. I think it was C Company, off the top of my head. So everybody got off, and we kind of led them through the village into our positions. The company commander got a brief as to what had gone on, what had happened, what the situation was on the ground. And then One Para kind of done a relief in place with us. They took over our defensive positions, which allowed the blokes to drop back into the village a little bit, and obviously then start cleaning the weapons, sorting their own personal admin out, even getting a brew on. And then One Para were just sort of doing what One Para did, taking control of the ground. At that point then, we kind of sat and looked at each other and went, right, let's get some ammunition. And why don't we end this now, if we can? Why don't we take the platoon out on a fighting patrol? Why don't we push into the jungle? Why don't we follow them up and see what happens? Obviously, we'd gone to One Para. One Para company commander had said, well, we'll do it. And he ended up in a bun fight with our officer that was on the ground. And in the end, we said, no, we're going to go and do it. We've been here for 10 days. We know the lie of the ground. So we divvied the platoon up, 12 with me, 12 with the ops warrant officer. And we basically pushed out from the village into the jungle, moving kind of paralleling the road, using that as a handrail or the track, heading towards Port Loco. We'd initially said we'll push into the jungle. If we don't come into contact, we'll push into the jungle to the limit of the 349s, a kilometre, let's say. So we kind of moved off in two fighting patrols, One Para kind of holding the village, and then we pushed off, talking, communicating to each other, got in the jungle, and then started to come across these first signs of, injury. Bandolier, RPK here, AK-47 here, bit of blood here. So we kind of got to about a kilometre. Wag and I were on the radio. We'd reached the sort of limit of exploitation. We said, well, I'll tell you what, let's push on. So we said, right, okay. So we now pushed on about another K. So we're now 2K into the jungle. At that point, you're kind of going, right, we're kind of out on a limb here now,
Yeah.
There was nothing to suggest that they were still around there. There was enough to suggest that they'd suffered significant injury, casualties, possibly, lots of stuff lying about, ammunition, a couple of weapons. I think Wag found like 4 weapons, 4 AK-47s and RPK had all been dropped, but no sign of them. It's almost like they just vanished back into the jungle.
Wow.
So we kind of made our way back to the village, got into the village, and again, within about half an hour of being back, that was probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Within about an hour, another Chinook landed, and it was the CO. CO had come in with the RSM. He came in, we had a chat, and he said, right, guys, I'm going to have to leave you here. I'm going to take the 1 para lads away because I need them, but I'm going to leave you here. What do you need?
Everything.
Everything. So we sat there, and you know what it's like, and it was like Quality Street. Well, shall we have 1 from the left, 2 from the top, 3 from the middle, 4 from the bottom?
What can I get my hands on?
Yeah. You know, we said, like, well, we want 381mm mortars, thinking we wouldn't get them. So I remember giving this bit of paper to John Goring, who was the RSM, and, you know, looking at it, and he went, okay. So they all got on this Chinook and flew off. 1 para stayed that night. And then obviously we were just kind of backfilling them. They took over the stags, allowed us to get a little bit of kip. And then obviously we started hearing all of what the RUF, like the West Side Boys, was synonymous with these screaming, wild, incandescent animal noises, trying to drive fear into the villages. So all night screaming and hooting and hollering and basically just keeping you awake. So that took us through the night. No sign of them coming back, no contacts. And then the next morning, first light, Chinook came in. And off the back come 381mm mortars with their respective mortar teams and ammunition resupply, which was great, Chris, as you can imagine. The 1 para lads got on the Chinook then and left. So they left us. There was 26 of us and about 11 1 para now, 3 mortar teams, an MFC and a signaller. And then we were like, right, okay, what do we do now? Because again, people are coming back into the village saying, you know, we're gonna sort of tell you that these people about. After the initial firefight, obviously there was dead on the track. There was dead bodies on the track. The Nigerians said, well, we'll take care of them. So what happened was, on the village trucks, they'd gone out and picked up the dead bodies and took them into the jungle to bury them, the RUF. And then as villagers were coming back in, they were reporting that they'd been told that they'd had to bury people and they'd been forced to bury people and treat injured. And then another vehicle came into the village with more. So they'd gone out and they were bringing the bodies back in to the village, and they got buried in the jungle. The local villagers buried them all with, you know, with whatever. We just didn't get involved in any of that. They took care of burying all the dead rebels, you know. So we then sort of went about just really getting the position sorted, Chris. Marking and recording DFs, marking and recording positions that we thought they were going to mass and rally, and then building a plan for extraction. What would happen if the village got overrun? When would we fire the FPF? When would we leave the village? Who would leave on the Pinsgower vehicle that we had, and the rest of us going on foot? So we kind of started building in that sort of E&E plan and what would happen, and then how long we'd stay in the village, and at what point we would, you know, start using the mortars. And to be honest, Chris, they came back the first night and we fired about 20 loom rounds that first night for the 81. The issue that we'd said to all of the guys is call a fire mission if you can clearly identify people massing. But remember, there's cities still coming in. There's villages coming through the jungle. There's a lot of noise still out the front. We can't start dropping 81mm HE on groups of people that we can't clearly identify, you know.
Yeah.
And that was it. We were on a knife edge for about another 7 days. So we're now at day 16.
Wow.
Again, belt kit still, little bits of food coming in, hearts and minds with the villagers, trying to maintain that sort of relationship with them. And then on day 16, we got a radio message saying that we were to leave and be at the HLS the next morning. We were extracting in our entirety, and there would be no relief in place. And I say to people, you know, when I used to do the corporate speech in corporate speeches and sort of keynote speeches, is of all of the sort of times in the army that you've got to give bad news or feelings of regret and woe and you know, not being able to do anything, was that night when we told the blokes that we had to leave, and then we went and told the village elder that the next morning we would be leaving. Bearing in mind, they'd stood shoulder to shoulder with us for 16 days. They'd helped us. The girls had gone down to the village with the demijohns and they were bringing water back. They were cooking food. They taught the guys how to make snail curry. They'd done everything that we'd asked them to do for 16 days. And then we had to tell them we were leaving. And of course, you know, they were like, well, what will happen to us? Once you have gone, what will happen to us? Yeah, it was gut-wrenching, Chris. Absolutely gut-wrenching.
Yeah, and was there nothing in place? Did it? I assume, yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? That is like, what do you do? Obviously, there's a sense of relief. It's a mixed bag of emotions, isn't it? It's a sense of relief because, look, 16 days in the jungle in your belt kit, sleeping on the floor, as we said. For anyone that's been in the jungle, I did Belize and stuff, your body starts to fall apart. It's a hospitable, horrible, wet. Your body's in bits. So for 16 days on a knife edge like that, there's an element of relief that you're leaving, but then you're torn. You know, like you said, these villagers that you've struck up a rapport, what we do best, using them for not only like intelligence, but then you will develop friendships and stuff, and then you're having to pull out. Yeah, that's horrible, really. Did you ever get any findings about what happened after you pulled out?
Obviously, we got on board the Chinooks and we left, you know, and we flew back to Lungi Airfield. Then instantly we were straight into the sort of intel. We need to know what's happening. What's the latest? Where are the rebel movements? What are their dispositions now? What is the likelihood? What we didn't know at the time is that the leader of the RUF, who was a former corporal in the Sierra Leone army, was a guy called Fode Sanko. He'd been captured on the morning of the 17th when they'd attacked us. He'd been captured in Freetown, arrested and imprisoned. He'd subsequently killed himself in a jail cell. Yeah. So at that, the loss of him, the idea that that they'd come up against the British Army in a firefight, possibly had led to the breakup. The clamber for power, the sort of the group breaking into smaller fractions had kind of broken them up, and they subsequently never went on to be another threat. And then that created the sort of vacuum for the West Side Boys to fill. Yeah. In the September, as we were there in the May. So everything that we've ever been told, everything that we were ever led to believe and find out, suggested that village was never attacked. And it never suffered any kind of violence at the hands of a rebel gang.
Yeah, well, that's a sense of, you know, and it's nice to know that, because stuff like that will play on your mind. We're human at the end of the day, and I know we are soldiers, but again, that's what we do very, very well, is kind of switching between and just being like having that sort of humanity about us, I believe. So obviously fast forwarding after Sierra Leone, like again, that in itself, just living with the jungle and that threat, it's going to play, you know, it's a big deal, isn't it? Let's be honest. Yeah. It's a big deal. But it's also what you want to do as a soldier, especially being in the Pathfinders. It's what you train for. It's what you want to do. So obviously you've come home after that. What was so firstly, did you not feel about ever think about going on SCS selection? Because obviously not long after that, you made a decision to leave the military. Where were them decisions? Because I would say, you weren't too old then, were you, to go on SCS selection? Did you not fancy it?
No, so I'd been on SAS selection.
Right.
I'd been on it in 1993.
Right.
You know, so I went on SAS selection, got to the end of the jungle, and got a stand up at the end of the jungle. So that was and then obviously I went back to the PF at the end of that, and kind of dropped back into that life. The realization that maybe it wasn't meant to be, you know. So. You know, and then coming back after Sierra Leone, I was kind of 32, you know, and I don't know, maybe impulsively, maybe I don't know, maybe putting it down to being petulant. I kind of thought, well, you know, I don't know. The PF were getting a hard time. We had no equipment still. We were buying our own kit. We had radios that didn't work, and yet we were being still dependent on, do you know what I mean? And there was no sign of anything at all that was required. Equipment, manning, pay, anything at all. And I kind of thought, well, you know, I don't really want to keep going on like this. There's regrets in my life. One of them was maybe leaving when I did. But I got to that point and I just went, you know, in all honesty, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So very shortly after that, I left. You know, I kind of, you know, left the army. You know, I'd been offered a job, so I was weighing it all up. I'd been offered a job which was on a lot more money. It was in the UK, and I thought to myself, is now the time to break? You know, I was coming up to 16 years then in the army. I thought, well, I'm 6 years away from my pension. Is it financial suicide? But I'd had a job offer that kind of might have made that up. So again, you know, I made the decision to leave, Chris, and I've lived with that for a long time because, you know, shortly after that, you know, the world changed forever, didn't it? And, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sanguine with my decision. You know, it took me a while to kind of regret it. And I had a really good chat with the OC at the time, who was now the Reggie Colonel. And he said, look, if any time in the next 12 months you want to come back, just phone me and come straight back. You know, and like anything, Chris, we all have regrets in life, you know, and was it right for me? Was it wrong? I don't know. Looking back on it now, I'd probably say I made the right decision to leave. Back then, I'd toyed with it, and it was the devil on my shoulder for about 12 months when I'd left. Shall I go back? You know. But,
It's one of them, innit? And I can relate 100%. I didn't do nowhere near as long as you. I did 7 years. I was on Palliser. I was in Macedonia. I did Afghanistan. Nothing major really happened. There was the threat there. They were good tours. But again, the lure of big kind of money working in the CP industry as a 24-year-old was what I chose to do, similar to yourself. It was good money. I thought, you know, I'm going to go into that something different. And a bit like you, I look back and go, I wish I'd probably done a bit more in the military. But that, you know, all roads lead to now, don't they? You kind of make them decisions and you kind of live by them and you stick by them. And I don't really have many regrets now. It is what it is, isn't it? But you went on to do lots of interesting jobs after. I'm very aware that we're an hour 40 in. I don't want to keep you too much longer with the rest of the night.
I don't mind, mate.
Multiple civilian jobs, working in Dubai, you know, working in kind of the Middle East and stuff like that. You worked with August as well, didn't you? With Nick McCarthy, is that right?
Yeah. So I was, I went to work with Nick just before COVID happened. So, you know, when Nick was up there and his business partner wanted to retire. So, you know, the sort of CP courses then were sort of, you know, were really taking shape. So, you know, I went in with Nick and kind of was responsible for running the CP courses. So, you know, when I left the army, I went to work in CP, did my stint in London and, you know, the various sort of stuff. When I came back from Dubai, so when I came back in 2015 after 13 years, nearly 14 in Dubai, I kind of picked up for a little bit, did a little bit more work on the circuit, did a lot of stuff with, with individuals, high net worth, a lot of stuff with some celebrities, with sports people. So it was natural then that I kind of, I knew Nick, and Nick had said, "What do you think about this?" And so I said, "Right, okay, I think we could do some really good stuff." And that's what we did. We ended up running carrying on the mantle that had been set by Brian, his partner, when Brian had retired. So we kind of just carried on with what was in place and kind of, got it ready for the changes that were made to the CP course. It went from 12 days to 18 days, and there was lots of changes within the SIA that we had to conform to. But obviously we had COVID then, which kind of destroyed everybody's business. Especially when your money is in making sure that you've got 12 people on the course, and you can't have more than 2 people in a room sat 2 meters apart and all the rest of it. So it was difficult times, but we came through it, and Argus is thriving. Argus has got a rich history, and does some really good stuff. So I enjoyed my time there. It was a great sort of 3-4 years there.
Yeah, I know. I know Nick. I went through depot with Nick. I know Nick very well. So we come through depot together. And he's probably arguably one of the better courses out there. There are some good standout courses, and they're not good ones, but they've always had a very, very good reputation. And I know Nick's professionalism, and I don't know Brian, but I've heard him spoke very highly of as well. Yeah. So kind of moving on from that, you do a lot of keynote speaking, motivational speaking and stuff like that. I like that sort of thing. I think it's good because, again, people like yourself with your experience, your military knowledge and what you've done within the Parachute Regiment, Pathfinders and beyond, I think it's good that you can give a lot back and a lot of advice that a lot of people can relate to. So do you find that stuff enjoyable? Do you still do a lot of that?
I do it if I'm asked now, rather than going out and actively looking for it. Yeah. But as you'll see now, there's a lot of links between, whether it be high performance sports, whether it be education, whether it be industry. There's a lot of synergy to what the military does, and people look for that. And as I say to people, don't sell yourself short that you're in the military. You've got so many sort of soft skills that you forget about because you do them every day, that business, sport, enterprise look for. The self-discipline, self-motivation, self-reliance, self-resilience, self-discipline. We've got them in spades. We're timekeepers, we're team players. We overcome adversity. We're strong communicators. We work well in teams. We adhere to instructions. We follow instructions. We have the ability to be firm but fair. We're disciplined. So all of those skills are invaluable to any enterprise. And a lot of that, especially if you can wrap that up in an anecdote, whether it be what is the purpose of strong communication? How can failure of communication lead to a disruption of a team? What happens if you get your logistics wrong? What happens if discipline breaks down? How do you deal with a strong personality in the boardroom or in the dressing room? So all of those skills that we laugh and joke about are really in demand. Really in demand. So
absolutely, but they're ingrained in you. From yourself, 16.5 years of age. Them skills that you have are from a very, very early age, where a lot of kids, or they don't join the military, don't find their feet or find their kind of way in life till their mid-20s. 16.5 years of age, joining a unit like the Parachute Regiment. And I will get stick from this. I'll get the trolls that will come up and say, oh, well, this and that. I don't give a toss. I know what it takes to be there. I know the training that's involved that goes through it, and the life lessons and the life stuff that it kind of brings, that I still now, and probably yourself, I rely on now still in everyday life, in the professions I've done. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. And I think a lot of civilian organizations, and like you say, can take that kind of stuff away. But look, what are you up to nowadays, Steve, if you don't mind me asking, before we finish off quite nicely?
Yeah, so obviously I moved back up to the northeast when because obviously Argus was based up here.
Yeah.
So I kind of moved back into my hometown, and sort of for the last year or so, I've been working as an operations director. For a major, sort of site services company. I mean, it's really good for me because I technically work for my best friend. Which is amazing for me, to be able to sort of, overlay them skills that we've talked about, from a project management point of view, looking at logistics, looking at programming, planning, strategies, anticipating where things are going to go wrong, stopping choke points happening, and then that real sort of strategizing, building plans, dealing with workforces. So again, all those skills that we have, that we can now articulate and put into practice, to allow businesses to run smoother, to not have hiccups, to make sure they're prepared, have contingencies in place for when things go wrong. So yeah, it's been really great for me. It's an eye opener because again, I've jumped into an industry that's not my forte. What is my forte is that management of those things, which is really great.
No, excellent. Well, look, Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming and sitting with me for nearly an hour and 45 minutes and going through your. Genuinely, I find it absolutely fascinating. You'll know that if I don't say a lot, it's not because I sit there in awe of listening to these stories. I absolutely love it when people like yourself come on and share. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot and find, and take a lot away from your stories. And I always say, these podcasts, I come away with every single podcast learning something or taking small amounts away from them. So thank you from a personal point as well, because I will take things that you've said away on a personal level as well. But look, Steve, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. I will chat to you in a second briefly off air, but for now, I wish you all the best in the future, but thanks again.
And you, thanks, Chris. Likewise, buddy.